Most inner cities, predominantly black communities, are what they call sacrifice zones, where real estate agencies and banks and businesses drew a red line around those communities and said, we're divesting. We're not going to invest anything into these communities for the sustenance and preservation of the people here. So there was no people development ever intended with the development of these, or the underdevelopment of these environments. So that's what we're dealing with primarily. So what you get when people are living in such a state of poverty and deprivation, you get people at their wits' end. It's deliberate and intentionally manufactured hopelessness, and it's serving a purpose. It's serving several socioeconomic and political purposes, and it always has historically. When we look at how the inner city is set up and what happens there and why it happens, when you're destitute, there's not a lot of opportunity. You make opportunity for yourself. Things that were once considered unseemly behavior to you may become viable options for some type of economic gain, or just a sense of being able to experience something fanciful even. So it's a lot of destitution there, and it's created by a system that was set up to exploit these particular peoples and populations socioeconomically and politically. It's in the best socioeconomic interest of prison industries to have the situation play out the way it's playing out. I mean, let's go back a little bit. We came through 250 years, approximately 300 years of chattel enslavement in the United States. 300 years of unretributed, unreparated labor, which basically made the United States the country that it is today. And then from 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation, we went into another 100 years of struggling and fighting for basic human rights, let alone civil rights, let alone citizenship. Within that 100 years, it was 100 years of lynching. Lynching was like throwing a block party. It was like throwing a cookout. That's how frequently it occurred in the United States. Realistically, the black populations of the United States, the predominantly inner city populations of black people, the urban dwellers, have basically been able to move freely in this country for only approximately about 45 years, roughly 50 years. We're almost that age. All of us are almost that age. We're all 40s or late 30s. You know what I mean? So black independence, or ability to maneuver as a citizen in this country, is not even as old as us. So how much advancement do you think can occur for a collective, for a total population of people who have been held back, repressed, suppressed, oppressed for all those years? So we're looking at a white power structure primarily that had a 500-year head start, and now they want to measure wealth gaps and education gaps and all these things that are not being put into the proper historical context when you're measuring it. They've created this destitution. So we're up to 1965, Civil Rights Acts. Black people in the United States suddenly become citizens and can theoretically move freely through the country. But we know that that's not what happened, because the Civil Rights Acts were signed in 1965, Martin Luther King was assassinated in 68, Malcolm X 65, and so on and so forth. Medgar Evers, they all were assassinated right after that. Then the Black Panther Party were ran down on right after that. So all the way up to 1975, we had the agents of repression going extremely hard to eradicate black movements for justice. So here we are at 1975. And then in 1975, we get this divestment and redlining situation. And we get white populations moving out of inner cities to undermine the Civil Rights Acts. So we had this integration movement. Okay, we're going to do this integration thing so that the wealth can be distributed a little more equally. The bankers, politicians found loopholes in it, and they created complete completely new, self-sustaining communities outside of the inner cities that white people fled to. They call it white flight, suburban sprawl, or whatever you want to call it. And it wasn't, white people went out, they built all these new homes, new developments, all the businesses relocated out to these areas. The inner cities were redlined and left to die. They called them sacrifice zones. You can Google that. What is a sacrifice zone? In this type of paradigm, you have deprivation at an all-time high, and people are like, okay, well, when we look at it today, we look at these nice neighborhoods, these nice gated communities that you see predominantly white people living in these days. And a lot of people like, well, they work hard. If you work hard, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But that's not what happened. We know that's not what happened. There was a time when this exodus out of the inner city by white people was fueled by the government, by FHA loans that were white only loans that subsidized the purchasing of houses for white people in the suburbs. And they couldn't get the loans if they wanted to remain in the inner cities. So the loans were only available to white people and only white people who wanted to move out of the inner city, which was basically all the white people, So they left with the government assistance, welfare, basically, But today, what they created, they act as if they don't know how East New York became a ghetto. They act like they don't know how Trenton, New Jersey became a ghetto, how Camden, New Jersey became a ghetto, how so many areas in Chicago became ghettos. The projects, people talk about the projects and all that. The projects at one time was where you would want to stay. Why? Because projects were built by factories and companies to house their employees. That's why all projects are next to railroads and factories, so that the employees wouldn't have to go that far to get to work. And these low-income housing setups were subsidized by the government and the company in question for white people, for white employees. Black people could not get this low-income housing. We could not live in the projects at this time. It was a white only thing. That being the case, when they withdrew all investment out of these inner cities, which correlated directly with the withdrawal of white people or the exodus of white people from the inner cities, they left everything to go, So then we had this real estate-based school funding, tax-based school funding, which basically depleted the municipal budgets for schools in the inner cities. So it was all designed. It was designed to do what it's doing. And then when you put these people in this trap, and the people are destitute and void of hope, immediately following that, you flood these communities with illicit drugs. You do it. Nobody in the community wakes up one day and say, hey, I got this connect in South America. I'm going to bring this cocaine in here. I got this connect for this heroin over in Afghanistan. I'm going to bring this heroin over here. That never happened.